Does anyone else just want to watch season 2 right now? Hi, I'm Cinechap. Welcome to the channel. In today's video, we're looking at the season 1 finale of Pluribus. I'll recap, review, and break down the episode, offer my thoughts, and discuss theories on what could be next for the show when it returns for season 2. If you enjoy this video, give it a like, consider subscribing, and checking out some of my other movie and TV show reviews, and help out a small content creator. Now, let's begin. We open with 71 days, which is 11 days in the future, I believe, from the end of last episode, which was, I think, 60 days. And we have an isolated vignette here of some events that are separate from what's happening with Carol and Manousos, but nonetheless become very relevant later on in the episode, particularly for Carol. And in this scene, Kasumayu joins the others. It opens with a jet flying overhead, and we see this plane land, and a container is delivered to Kasumayu's village. As we learned earlier on in the season, Kasumayu lives with her family, but she's the only one who didn't join. She's the only one who didn't turn, as it were, on the day of the joining 71 days ago. And her family seem very caring and loving. They're singing songs to her. They're being very considerate of the culture. And it all seems very authentic and loving. Kasumayu seems a bit nervous and perhaps a bit unsure about what's going to happen. But nonetheless, she has decided to join. And right up until she does, she's stroking this goat affectionately, this little baby goat, which is really cute. And as mentioned before, this jet lands and this container is delivered to the village. And when it arrives, everyone gathers round as she leaves the stable where the animals were that she was affectionately looking after. And the villagers are all singing around her. It's all very celebratory. And they ask her one last time, Kasumayu, are you ready? She says yes. And they open this container and it has this white gas, which she breathes in. She then falls back and goes into a seizure. And perhaps most disturbingly, as soon as she falls back and is unconscious, all the singing stops. There's just an eerie silence as they all just stand and watch her as she goes through this process of the joining. And she wakes up and she has the same blank, expressionless smile on her face. She walks over to the outside farm area where these animals were being kept and she lets them go. And this baby goat is bleating after her. It's chasing her, trying to call out to her. And she just walks off smiling, not a care in the world. And all her family members, all of these villagers, they all just disband and they just leave without a word in eerie silence as this goat bleats and stands alone, abandoned by a human that it was affectionate with. And this really just illustrates why the joining is bad. It's the removal of humanity, of emotion, of individual expression. It's a bad, world-ending thing. It really is. Even though they put on this veneer of acceptance and authenticity and culture, we just saw an entire culture get eradicated before our eyes in such a dispassionate and emotionless way. Truly chilling, honestly. And it's a great opening to this episode, to which we cut to the title sequence. We then see Carol and Zoja watching a live feed of Manousos' ambulance driving up a road towards Albuquerque, towards Carol's house. And Zoja tells Carol that he is about 2 hours away. Carol clarifies, is this the guy I yelled at when I was on the phone? And Zoja says, yes. And she also asks why he's in an ambulance. And Zoja says, it's a long story. And Zoja lets Carol know that he did receive Carol's first video. And Carol has a bit of a concerned expression on her face. As we see later on, Manousos' state of mind is very much where Carol was several days and even weeks and months ago. She has obviously now come round to the idea of the others, particularly Zoja, being more present in her life. Zoja expresses that I probably shouldn't be here when he arrives. Zoja also says, you don't have to be here either. But Carol says, well, he's driven all the way from Paraguay. I owe him a conversation at least, don't I? She says, I'll hear him out and then send him on his way. Obviously, she has no desire to work alongside him to stop the others anymore. She seems resigned to it, especially now she believes at this point there is no ticking clock. There is no reason they can turn her. There's no way they can do that without her stem cells or her consent. 2 points which will become very relevant later on in this episode, and I cannot wait to discuss. Manousos in the next scene then arrives at Carol's house, and it's here where we see it's confirmed now this is 60 days after the joining, so 11 days prior to the opening scene with Kasumayu, and taking place right after the end of episode 8. Manousos carefully gets out of the ambulance and looks a bit weary, but has a look around and sees that it's completely alone, it's isolated, there's no one around, and he tries to fix his hair a bit to look slightly less unkempt before meeting Carol. He elects to blare the horn on his ambulance instead of knocking on the door, and Carol opens the door and we hear the very familiar line that we heard many times during the course of episode 7. He takes a breath and he says, "My name is Manousos Eviedo. I am not one of them. I wish to save the world." Carol says, "Hola, me llamo Carol Stalker." And there's a bit of an awkward silence, and this is not the way I think either of them expected this meeting to go. Certainly not Manousos, who saw this very passionate, fired up individual who was very intent on saving the world and getting other survivors alongside in order to join her in this mission. Instead, she looks not particularly pleased to see him. And of course, what Manousos doesn't know is how much Carol's mindset has changed in the many, many days since she sent that first video. Carol requests Manousos puts his machete away back in the ambulance. And Zosha made it clear earlier that he doesn't think he would harm her, implying that he may very well harm the others. From the others' perspective, they don't really know what Manousos is thinking or necessarily what his intentions are, but they have a fairly good idea, and they know he is not especially pleased with the others. As he previously stated, they have stolen humanity, they don't belong here, and he would rather burn his own prized possession and car instead of letting them help him. Manousos asks Carol to talk in the ambulance, away from the house and away from the prying eyes and ears of the others. There's an awkward standoff, and Carol brings her phone over with a translator app on in order to try and better communicate with him. But Manousos grabs it out of her hand as he's worried that they're going to be listening, that they're going to be using this device in order to listen into their conversation, and he wants total privacy over what they are going to discuss. Carol's trying to explain it's an airplane mode, it doesn't have signal, they can't track it, but he's not understanding and he snatches it, and there's a scuffle, there's a fight, there's an altercation, and the end result of which is this phone falls into the drain outside. Carol is understandably very frustrated, and she says, "You can get back into your ambulancia and fuck right off." And she storms back inside. Manousos looks very annoyed and irritated, and he grabs his machete to try and pull the phone out of the grate. And as he does so, he says, "This sucks. 9,000 kilometers for this." I mean, you got to feel for the guy. He's traveled all of this way, and his first interaction with Carol has not gone very well at all. They've certainly not gotten off on the right foot. But I think we all anticipated there would be conflict here when these two met, especially given Carol's changed state of mind since she sent that first video. Manousos manages to retrieve the phone out of the grate using the magnet on the back of it and the machete which sticks to it. Manousos then brings the phone to Carol's front door, speaks into it, and the translation says back, "Okay, you win. Telephone yes, ambulance no. But I need an umbrella." We then see where the screen grab of this episode came from, which is Manousos and Carol standing under a pink umbrella outside. Manousos wants them both to stand under the umbrella to stop the others from spying from them in the sky. He believes they'd be able to read lips from space, which probably is true, to be honest, considering they have the entire world's security and spy network apparatus at their disposal. Carol's encouraging him, "No, let's speak inside." And he says, "There'll be microphones in there. We can't speak in there." She's saying, "No, it's not bugged." And he's saying, "Insect? What do you mean?" So they're getting, again, confused with translations. Carol's asking, why would they spy on us inside our house? And Manousos replies, "Why would the weirdos send me that video?" Manousos says, "If these weirdos are evil, if we can't fix them, they are better off dead." Carol explains, yes, they're weird and they're too nice, but they wouldn't harm us. They wouldn't even kill an ant. They are not evil. And Manousos replies, "And isn't it evil to value a man the same as an ant?" Bringing to question the whole ethos of the others, which is we love everything equally, and they see no distinction between ant or man or any other living thing or any other piece of art or created works, which is once again the disillusionment of what it means to be human fundamentally. To not have preference or opinion or individual thought is, as annoying as it can be to disagree with others, is ultimately what makes us who we are. Carol replies to this question, "Have you even tried talking to them? You could learn a thing or two," which directly mirrors the response she got back from the other survivors all the way back in episode 2, demonstrating once again that Carol is in a very different place to where she was when she sent that first video. in terms of her attitude to the others. Manousos decides to put that aside and instead says, "You said the weirdos abandoned you." Carol replies, "Yep, for 40 days. And Manousos says, "Huh, why did they come back?" She says, "I don't know. Why can't they pick an apple?" Manousos doesn't look convinced and she says, "This is stupid," motioning to the umbrella, and she walks off, saying, "I'm going inside," perhaps giving away a little more than she bargained for. And Manousos is clearly onto her with this. She is not having the wool pulled over his eyes so easily. She is not going to just convince him that everything is okay and he should just drop this whole saving the world idea. They go back inside and there's a brief shot where Manousos sees Helen's headstone outside in the garden as they walk by. We then see Manousos doing an extensive sweep of the house, looking under the sofas, checking for any bugs behind the TV and the walls. There's then a funny little exchange where Manousos clicks at Carol and asks her for the phone back so he can talk to her with the translator. And Carol's having none of it. She goes, no, we're not doing this click thing. I'm not going to respond to that in a positive way. And instead goes up to her and asks for the telephone. And the telephone, please. And does this this smile that just made me crack up so much because he is doing such a disingenuous smile. He's just doing it to get the telephone from her. And it's a direct contrast to how the other smile, which is with a genuineness and with a warmth, but isn't human. And his grin here is just so human and so funny. It just made me crack up. It's on screen right now. If you see the episode, you know exactly which bit I'm talking about. It was just hilarious. And Carol sighs and hands him back the telephone so they can continue communicating. Manousos asks, what about the other 11 survivors? Did they respond to the video? Carol says no. Manousos says they didn't even want to talk. As he's continuing to look around lampshades, Carol says, "You're not going to find anything." And she decides, "I need a drink. Do you want a drink? You need a drink." As Manousos continues to search around in the background. He's then looking around the drinks cabinet as well for microphones or bugs or anything, any other listening devices. And Carol's starting to get a little annoyed about being blocked from getting her alcohol, saying, "I don't know how you guys handle it in Paraguay, but here in Albuquerque, if you cockblock someone from their booze, it's un grande mistake." But while she's saying this, Manousos finds some sort of sensor, some sort of device on the inside of the door of the drink cabinet. Carol says, "What is that?" And he says, "A sensor, maybe." Carol immediately picks up the phone and talks to Zoja and exclaims, "Have you been spying on me?" Carol explains there's this thing in a liquor cabinet. When Zoja says, "Spying?" Zoja asks what kind of thing, and Carol begins to describe it some sort of cheap, tacky, plasticky, rectangular thing from some sort of James Bond movie. And Carol says, "It sure as shit did not come with the cabinet. Did you put it there?" Zoja explains, "It wasn't us, Carol. Do you remember May of 2011? You were freezing your eggs." Carol's like, "Yeah, so?" Zoja explains, "The device is a movement sensor. It detects when the cabinet is opened, then records it." Again, we didn't put it there. Carol puts two and two together and says, "Helen." Zoja says, "Sorry, Carol." And Carol's like, no, it's all right. And says, "I'll call you later," and hangs up. So from that, we understand that Helen was obviously trying to monitor Carol's alcohol intake at that time. And so had put a sensor on the drinks cabinet to do that. And as ever with this show, this seemingly random event will become very relevant later on in this episode. And believe me, it will become relevant. Carol explains, "It wasn't them, it wasn't the others." Manousos says, "Who?" Carol says, "My ex. She didn't like my drinking." Carol says, "Now I really need a drink." Manousos clarifies, "Who are you talking to on the phone?" And Carol says, "Them. Always them. The others." Carol then says, "I'm tired. We'll save the world tomorrow." And shows him to one of her neighbor's house where there's fresh sheets on the bed, towels in the bathroom, food in the fridge. "You can stay here. No problem." And she says, "We'll talk more tomorrow. Good night." And as she's about to leave, Manousos asks, "Whose house does this belong to?" And Carol says, "I think their name is Wilson." Carol says, "Look, I'll square it up with them if they ever return." And she says, "Oh, that would be a great problem to have." Carol is clearly done and she's fed up of Manousos' moral grandstanding. And she's like, "Look, that ambulance outside, does that belong to you? You can sleep in that for all I care. I'm done. I'm out of here." And she leaves him alone. Manousos picks up the phone and one of the others replies in Spanish, "Hello, Manousos. We're so happy to hear from you. What can we do for you?" And he asks about the person that Carol was speaking to, and he wants to know her name. We then see night has fallen, and Carol has once again fallen asleep drinking and watching Golden Girls. She wakes up from her stupor and puts a chair in front of the front door, clearly slightly afraid that Manousos could just waltz in at some point and potentially cause her harm. She then looks outside and she sees something a little odd, which is Zoja's car is parked outside of where Manousos is staying. She runs over in a slight panic to see that Manousos and Zoja have been talking. Cal enters and says, "What the hell is going on here? What are you doing?" And says to Zoja, "What did you tell him?" And Manousos replies, "Todo, everything." Cal looks horrified and says, "Zoja, we're going. We're getting out of here. Come here. Now, let's go." Zoja tries to politely say, "Oh, I really enjoyed chatting with you." Manousos and Cal's like, "Let's get out of here now." Manousos picks up the phone after they've left and says, "Send me another." Before Cal and Zoja enter her house, Cal wishes to clarify with Zoja, "Todo, everything? How much of everything? What kind of everything?" And Zoja looks resigned and says, "Everything." And Zoja apologizes, "Sorry, Cal, everything." And says he asked us specific, very detailed questions. He was very thorough and insistent. And Cal is really annoyed. She's like, "Why do you have to be so fucking honest?" And Zoja says, "It's just not in us to lie to you." And Cal says, "Yeah, but to me, not to him." And Zoja replies, "I know this is hard to understand, but we love him the same as we love you." And Cal's like, "What? But he's a stranger to you. You barely know him. That's crazy. You're my. She can't even say it out loud. She so desperately wants to believe that Zoja is her girlfriend, her partner. Instead, she says, "You're my chaperone." And it's heartbreaking. Cal's heart is so absolutely broken in the moment where Zoja says, "We love him the same as we love you." And it comes back to the question Manousos asked Cal earlier: is it not evil for someone to love an ant as much as they love a man and love them all equally? There is no hierarchy here. The others just simply, well, love in their own way everyone equally. And so Cal is not any more special to them than Manousos, who, again, they barely know. And this goes some way to shattering the illusion that Cal has been under since Zoja returned some week and a half ago. And as I said, Cal is just heartbroken at this point, and she has this expression on her face where she takes a moment and it seems like she just swallows the hurt and the emotions and instead goes back to anger and is trying to logically argue her point. "Did you see his machete? And you should hear the things he's saying about you. He calls you weirdos and evil." And as she's saying this, Zoja calmly starts lying flat on the ground. And Carol says, "What are you doing?" And Zoja says, "Sorry, Carol, something's about to happen. Please don't be alarmed." And she goes into a seizure, not unlike the times where Carol has gotten very loud and aggressive at Zoja and the others previously in the show. But we now see Carol has a very different reaction. She's concerned for Zoja and she's puts a pillow under her head. She's trying to look after her. She's trying to figure out what's going on. She's afraid and worried and concerned about her as opposed to seeing her as an other. We truly see how far down the rabbit hole Carol has gone here. Carol takes a moment and once again puts two and two together and runs across to where Manousos is. She bursts into the house and sees one of the others lying down on the sofa with Manousos crouching next to him. Carol bursts in and says, "Hey, what are you doing?" And Manousos goes out the door and retrieves his notebook from his bag in the ambulance and his radio, which had the signal on it that he had found previously that wasn't just static. It had some sort of rhythmic drum beat going on, frequency being 8613. He finds it on the radio and he brings it into the room where the other is laying. As he plays it, this other man, he stirs, he wakes up, he looks a bit disorientated, but he seems completely fine. Carol's saying, "You're okay, you're fine. It's all right. Just take it easy." Manousos then immediately yells in his face, full volume, and the man goes back into a seizure again. Carol says, "What the fuck?" Again, it's very interesting seeing her on the other side of this, as this was exactly how she was behaving before, conducting experiments and trying to figure out how the others function and potentially how to cure them. Carol is alarmed and leaves the house. Manousos puts this little radio under the man's hand as he's lying down, puts it on his chest, and he speaks softly to him. He's being very gentle, and he says, "Rick, I know you were there. I help you. Listen, Rick, I am here. You come back. Yes, you can do it. Listen, Rick, you remember. Remember? You were there, but you come back. Rick, I know you were there, but you can remember. You can come back." And as he's muttering this to him really softly, really quietly, really gently, An explosion causes the painting behind him to shatter and fall off the wall. And Manousos crouches down in fear next to Rick. And he turns, and Carol is in the doorway, and she cocks a shotgun. She goes, and says, "Back away now." It's a pretty badass moment. But once again, we see Carol has very much changed her tune. We see Carol is next to Zoja and is checking that she's okay as she wakes up and comes to. She asks if she's okay, and Zoja reassures Carol that she'll be fine after getting her some water, and the phone is ringing in the background. And Carol can guess exactly who it's going to be, and she picks up the phone and says, "It wasn't me this time." Listens for a bit to what's presumably a angry tirade on the other end and says, "Screw you too, Laxmi," and hangs up. Carol then goes back to see Zoja, and Zoja says, "You know what we have to do." And Carol nods. We see Rick getting back in his car and driving off, and we see Carol and Zoja head outside as Zoja gets ready to head off in her car. Zoja then asks, "Where's Manousos, Carol?" And Carol says, "He's fine, don't worry about him." Zoja says, "For what it's worth, you should know he did warn us first." And then she drives off into the night. And we also see in the background there are tail lights moving out of the city once again. The others are leaving Albuquerque, not because of Carol this time, but because of Manousos. Carol then heads over to her Rolls Royce and opens the boots, and Manousos is hanging out in there, and he's pulling a really funny pose. He's just kind of laying there. Again, it looked really funny. I don't know why. Did this also make you laugh? I don't know. This show's humor just really works for me for whatever reason. And once again, they're communicating via the translator, and Carol says, "They're leaving again, all of them, because of you. I tried to tell you." Manousos says, "So what? It was worth it completely. Now I know much more. You were right. I think there is a way to put back in their place. Come on. Now the work begins." But Carol doesn't want to hear it. She looks at him for a bit and then walks off and says, "There's power and water. If you need anything, food or whatever, just dial 0. Manousos says, "Carol, do you want to save the world or get the girl?" But once again, Carol's just not interested. And she gets in her car and she also drives off, leaving Manousos alone. And yeah, I was pretty annoyed that Carol didn't want to know what Manousos has found out because, again, if you've seen this episode, we don't actually find out what Manousos figured out. And I've got some speculation, I've got some theories on that, which we'll get to at the end of this recap. But yeah, I was pretty frustrated not to learn about what Manousos has discovered. We then cut to a montage of Carol and Zoja vacationing around the world, sitting by the pool, drinking, reading, having baths together, walking on the beach, going all around the world, having a wonderful time. We see them as well at a ski resort, coming off a ski lift, looking very happy, walking through the snow and into a large ski lodge where the fire comes on automatically as they walk in, and they get cozied up by the fire. And we then have what is, for me, the best and most important conversation in this entire episode and maybe the whole season. Zoja comes over to Carol with some drinks, and Carol says, "Ah, thank you." And they sit on the sofa together by the fire. And Zoja says to Carol, "You seem pretty quiet," indicating that she now knows Carol very well and very intimately, to the point where she knows something is slightly off. And Carol says, "Oh, no, I was just thinking." Zoja says, "What are you thinking?" And Carol says, "Nothing." Zoja then looks at Carol, and again, she knows Carol really well at this point. She knows when to pry and knows when Carol has something on her mind. And Carol says, "No, I was just wondering if the first you, the unjoined Zoja, did she have someone in her past?" She's asking about previous partner, previous ex. Zoja says she did. It was a long time ago. And Carol asks, what happened to them? Are they in there, like, with you right now? Zoja says, "No, they're not." And Carol says, so man, I'm sorry. But it's very interesting that Zoja uses they're not. And it's never specified which gender this partner was, because that's the other thing that's potentially a little morally dubious and certainly ethically questionable, is that Zoja, prior to the joining, may not have been into women. She may have been into men. And so this entire situation, it could become even more morally complex than it already is, if that was the case. Carol then says, "I don't think I'm good at just feeling good." She asks which chemicals it is that makes us happy. And Zoja then talks about some studies that have been done on zebrafish, and implying that oxytocin is responsible for happiness, and serotonin and all these other dopamine, all these other chemicals. And Carol says, "I must have every happy chemical flowing through my bloodstream, and I keep thinking it's going to go away, but then it doesn't." And Zoja says, "Well, that's great. It's only going to get better." And Carol pauses and looks at her and says, "Better?" Zoja gives her a little look, and Carol says, "You're not talking about the joining, are you?" And Carol says, "That's not even, you told me that you needed my stem cells." What, did that change? And Zoe says, nope, that's right. And Carol clarifies, so without my stem cells, you can't convert me. And Zoe says, mm-hmm. And Carol says, and if I don't expressly give you my consent to jam a giant needle in my ass, then you can't take them and I stay me, right? And Zoe pauses and pulls another face and says, that would be correct. Carol picks up on this and says, would be? And there's a pause. Carol says, there's no other way to get my stem cells, is there? And after an uncomfortable pause, Zoe looks reluctant to answer and doesn't say anything, but Carol says, if there wasn't, you'd say so. And Carol realizes, so there is a way. And Carol has a moment of quiet reflection and once again puts two and two together and says, my eggs, the ones I froze with Helen. You have them, don't you? Zoja nods. We do. And Carol says, and you can make them into stem cells, can't you? Zoja says it takes time and patience plus a bit of luck. Goes like, but you're working on it. She's starting to get annoyed and irritated and a bit worked up now. Zoja calmly replies, we are. And she says, you have to understand how beautiful it is, Carol. Your happiness, as happy as you've been, that's only the tip of the iceberg. In fact, Kasumayu, the young girl you met, the young Peruvian girl, she just joined us, bringing the episode full circle. And Zoja says, I promise you, she's happier than she's ever been. You can hear that straight from her if you like. Carol looks mortified and says, how long do I have? Zoja starts giving a very technical explanation, but Carol stops her and says, how long? Zoja says, a month. Hopefully, no more than 2 or 3. Carol takes a deep breath and with tears in her eyes says, if you loved me, you wouldn't do this. Zoja says, Carol, please understand we have to do this because we love you. Because I love you, which is, so manipulative and uncomfortable. And Carol stares her right down as she says that and takes a deep breath. And it is in this moment that Carol truly understands that the others will never stop. They are not going to stop trying to get her to join them. They can't stop. They won't. It's a biological imperative. They have to share this with the world, with the universe, with anyone they can. I mean, they're trying to build a giant antenna to send this signal across the stars to share it. They're not going to let these pesky few humans left on Earth stand in their way of accomplishing that and sharing this supposed never-ending joy and happiness. And it is now that the illusion and the fantasy has truly been shattered, and we see it all in Carol's eyes. And Ray Seahorn and Carol Vidra do a tremendous job, not only in this scene, but in this entire episode. Just fantastic performances. And something they brought up in the official Pluribus podcast, they wanted to highlight, particularly with Carol Vidra, is that she has to not mirror the emotions of the person in the other scene with her, which is something you typically do as an actor. You want to mirror the emotions of the person you're in a scene with, because that's just what people do. That's how they interact. But Carol Vidra does such an excellent job of being on a completely different emotional wavelength, particularly in this scene with Ray Seahorn. Carolina is pleading and optimistic and hopeful, and Carol is devastated, hurt, and heartbroken. We then hold on the silence of the two in this ski chalet, and we cut to 74 days, so potentially 3 days after that conversation we just observed, since Kasumayu was turned on the 71st day. And we see Manousos is studying. He has an extensive collection of books to do with crystallography and electricity and some other things that I can't quite make out because the camera goes out of focus, but he's writing in his notepad. He has a dictionary next to him, an English to Spanish dictionary, and he's looking up certain terms in order to understand how they translate to Spanish. We see him look up particularly a word which is loop, which can be related to circuit, and he writes in his notebook, loop equals circuital. He then hears a sound which sounds a lot like a helicopter outside, and he steps outside, and indeed there is a rescue helicopter outside, and it's carrying a small container underneath it. Manousos gets to the ground as the wind is quite violent on the ground due to the rotors of this helicopter. This helicopter drops this container right on Carol's drive and releases the winch that was holding it. It then lands in the cul-de-sac by Carol's house. We see that inside is Zoja and Carol and Zoja have what looks to be a very saddened look between the two of them. And Carol takes one last look at Zoja before taking off the headset and climbing out of the helicopter. We then see this really well done shot of the helicopter pulling up into the sky, and we just see Zoja in the cabin, supposedly flying this. And the official Pluribus podcast reveals that no, Carolina Vidra did not indeed take up helicopter lessons just for this one shot, but they in fact managed to obscure the helicopter pilot by framing the shot really well. But they did get a real helicopter and did all of this sequence for real in camera practically, and it's brilliant. And Zoja flies off into the sky as Carol looks on. Again, she still looks pretty upset, but she now has a determination on her face after a long fly. Manousos is standing across the way, and Carol says, "You win, we save the world." And Manousos comes up behind her and says, "Carol Sturker, what is this?" motioning towards the shipping container that's been placed on a drive by the helicopter. Carol replies flatly, "Atom bomb." Manousos has a glance at it, and we pan up all the way up to the sky, and you guessed it, music starts playing, we cut to black, and that is the end of season 1 of Pluribus. And man oh man, have we got a lot to talk about right now. And oh man, there are so many questions left, but I think we do have a clear trajectory going forward, at least for what will be the start of season 2. Manousos and Carol are going to work together to save the world, and between them, they might have a chance. I did want to see them work together in this episode, but I understand that there was inevitably going to be conflict, especially given the journey that Carol needs to go on in this episode. And to have the wool pulled away from her eyes, well and truly. She had to choose once again not to be happy and to see the truth. The others are not going to stop, as I said earlier, ever. And they now have a finite amount of time to stop them. 1 month potentially, and maybe 2 or 3. And once again, the clock is ticking and the pressure is back on for Carol. So one of the questions that I have after this episode is, what is Manousos up to? What did he discover with the radio frequency? My theory at this time is that he's discovered a way to block the signal, the connection that the others have with each other, that electromagnetic field that Zoja explained in the previous episode, and that maybe he's figured out a way to block that signal. And so perhaps he's doing all this reading on electrics and circuits in order to, what I predict will be some sort of giant antenna or a way to transmit a signal essentially around the area of their houses in order to have some sort of protected shield where the others cannot communicate with each other. So if one of them was to step into their territory, they would be maybe reverted back to normal or wouldn't be able to communicate with any others, any other others. That would certainly be an interesting development. And so if by using that radio frequency, they can communicate with people as they were before, they can find a way to keep them in that area and therefore permanently turn them back. Although, as I've mentioned before, if that signal was to go down or if they were to step out of that area, presumably they would all just turn back as it's become a biological imperative for them to join. That's certainly going to create a few conundrums. But yes, this episode was mainly about Carol turning away from happiness and accepting what she, I think, always knew to be true, which is that Zoja is not and cannot be a true partner to her. She cannot make her happy, and she is one of the others, and the others are not going to stop trying to turn Carol. They just can't. And now that the pressure is back on with this timeline, as the others are trying to extract Carol's stem cells from her frozen eggs, Carol has no choice but to once again go back to trying to save the world. Ray Seahorn recently gave an interview and she was asked, does she know what's coming next for Carol? And she says, I know the same as I did on Better Call Saul, one script at a time. I never have any idea where it's going. I haven't a clue what happens next season. A couple of big things happen in the finale, and I've got to tell you, I haven't a clue in the world where they're going. And Vince Gilligan did recently say they are back in the writer's room, but he cannot give a timeline on when the next season will be out. He says it's best for them to ignore all feedback and responses, positive and negative, and just bunker down and get on with writing the next season. He explains they were the first fans of the show, and so if they please themselves, then they should do a good job. And I have to say, I trust in Vince Gilligan. I expect that the next season will be just as interesting and intriguing, and I'm very interested to see now where things go, given the changed dynamics and state of play as it is at the end of this episode. Speaking of atom bomb, well, I guess that's a deterrent, isn't it? That will certainly make the others think twice about approaching Carol again, at least in person. I wonder if Carol would actually have the gumption to follow through with that kind of threat, though. I mean, nuclear Armageddon is pretty extreme, but then the stakes are rather high. Carol and Manousos certainly do not want to give up their humanity and would rather, I suppose, take themselves out and as many other people with them to prevent that from happening. According to the official Pluribus podcast, this was in fact a note given by Apple. They felt the season finale, as they had written it in a few different iterations, didn't have a punchy enough ending. And the addition of this atom bomb, bringing us full circle back from when Carol had that conversation all the way back at the hospital with the DHL guy, where she asked, hypothetically, would you give me an atom bomb if I asked if it would make me happy? And he replied, yes, although reluctantly. And it certainly, once again, raises lots of questions and lots of possibilities going forward. So with that, I think I'm done. I really hope you enjoyed Pluribus Season 1 as much as I did. I've certainly really enjoyed discussing with you in the comments the different theories, speculating on what's going to be coming next in every week's episode. But we are now at the end, and I'm excited for next year. I have some plans for this channel. So if you don't want to miss my next video, please consider subscribing. Drop this video a like if you did enjoy this, and feel free to look over my channel for other movie and TV show reviews. I hope you've all had a wonderful Christmas, spending time with friends, family, and loved ones, and I wish you all a happy new year. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.